अस्सलामुअलैकुम। अहमदिया निशात इस्लाम अपनी नशरियात पर आपको खुशामदीद कहती है। ये जो है हमारी ब्रॉडकास्ट हफ्ते के रोज, these broadcasts, I'm sorry, I'm doing the broadcast in the wrong language. Our Saturday morning broadcasts are in English, and they're called Lessons in Islam. And their objective is to look at the teachings of fundamentals of Islam and explain to our brothers and sisters their significance. I want to remind you that these broadcasts are brought to you by the courtesy of Lahore Ahmadiyya community. This organization was created by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib of Qadian, and he believed that the Holy Prophet Muhammad was the very last prophet. And after him, after Holy Prophet Muhammad, no prophet will come, whether an old prophet or a new prophet. He also believed, as do we, that the Holy Quran is complete and perfect. No verses have been left out of it. Our Ahl Sunnat wal Jamaat brothers believe that Ayat Rajam is missing from the Holy Quran. Our Shia brothers believe Surah Walayat is missing from the Holy Quran. Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad and we do not believe that any of verses are missing from the Holy Quran, because the Quran said, God said in the Quran that I have revealed it and I will protect it. So this is God's promise. If something is missing, then that means that God has failed in his promise. And we do not believe that God, having made a promise, will fail people. Let me add that in our reflections of the Holy Quran, we have been looking at God's promise to the Israelites and how he fulfilled his promise when the situation seemed desperate. People could not see how Moses will save them from Pharaoh and his armies. But this was God's promise and he fulfilled it. We also do not believe that any verse of the Holy Quran is abrogated. This is an extremely dangerous concept which people have used to further their own political ends over the centuries. And it has brought the holy religion of Islam into disrepute. We believe, as did Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, that everyone who recites the kalima is a Muslim. No one has the right to say to a reciter of the kalima that you are not a Muslim. In fact, in words of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if one reciter of the kalima calls another reciter of the kalima a heretic or a kafir, then it is the caller who is the heretic. Remember the Holy Prophet's words. It is the caller who is the heretic. What Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib claimed was inscribed on his tombstone immediately after his death. And that inscription was presented to Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin Sahib. He read it carefully and he signed it to show his approval that it's correct. And it was put on the tombstone. What did it say? Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, landlord of Qadian, Mujaddid of the 14th century of Hijrah, the promised Messiah and Mahdi. So at the time that the promised Messiah passed away, this was what the whole Jamaat believed. Certainly this was what the leaders of the Jamaat believed. And we have held on to that. Now, this series of broadcasts is about the fundamentals of Islam, the basic ideas of Islam. And over the last 16 broadcasts, we have discussed and looked at various things. We have looked at the kalima, we have looked at salat, we have looked at zakat, we have looked at saum, and so on and so forth. And today we move to Hajj, which is another pillar of Islam. And it will take, I guess, 3 or 4 broadcasts to deal with the whole thing in its entirety. So in this broadcast, we are going to lay down the foundation, the fundamentals of Hajj, why Hajj is performed, and then following on, we will look at its history and its rituals and the meanings of those rituals. So as I said, this might take 3, 4, maybe even 5 broadcasts to completely deal with this topic. And before we start on that, I want to say thank you and a prayer for that great man and the general of the promised Messiah's army, Hazrat Maulana Muhammad Ali Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, from whose books I greatly benefit. I particularly recommend to you his book, The Religion of Islam, in which he wrote, in fact, as a rebuttal and a reply to a book with the same name written by a Christian missionary. But in that, he deals in detail and in a wonderful way with all aspects, well, with most aspects of Islamic theology. And I frequently use it in preparing for these broadcasts. May Allah reward him and grant him a high station in heavens for his services to Islam and the Lahore Ahmadiyya community. In this broadcast, what I want to do is to correct a misunderstanding that Muslims have about jihad, about Hajj. Hajj is a kind of a jihad. It's a struggle. Especially in the days of old, it was a great, great struggle. These days, you can get a visa from your local Saudi consulate, book a flight, if you're rich enough, perhaps first class or business class, in a few hours, land in Saudi Arabia and perform the Hajj and then return. But imagine those days when people had to travel on horseback and camel and sometimes walk on foot or etc. to get from faraway places to Saudi Arabia. People would go from China, from Russia, from India, from Indonesia, all these places to perform Hajj. And it would take months and months to get there and get back. There are many people who would go there, men especially, and then stay there for 2 or 3 years. You learn about Islam and so on. And Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin, I think, he went to Hajj and he stayed there quite a long time before returning back to India. So yes, indeed, in those days, it was a great jihad that you undertook. But this has given rise to a misconception, which is that you go to jihad and all your sins, deliberate, by forgetfulness, by whatever else, are going to be forgiven. I want to strongly reject such ideas. As I said, I want to strongly reject some ideas that if you sin all through your life, and at the back of your mind is this idea that, well, that is okay. I'm lying, I'm cheating, I'm defrauding people, I'm robbing people of their rights, of their possessions, I'm not selling pure food or medication, but that's all right. That's all right. Why is it all right? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to go to Mecca and perform the Hajj, and all my sins will be forgiven. This is totally wrong. This is not akin to a baptism, that you sin and then you're a non-Christian and you become a Christian, and suddenly with baptism all your sins will be washed away. It is not that. Your intention from the very beginning was wrong. And that is one thing that Islam stresses. There is a hadith which says, deeds will be judged in the light of their intentions. Deeds will be judged in the light of their intentions. If your intention merely is basically to trick God into forgiving you all the wrongs you've done, make no compensation for the harm you've caused, then you will not be forgiven. And great saints of the days of past have said that maybe some years, even one person's Hajj is not accepted. There is something called Hajj Mabrur, which means that the Hajj that Allah accepts. Yesterday, I gave an example, which was for today, but it came to mind while I was delivering the Friday khutbah yesterday, Friday sermon, and I related it. Perhaps I should have kept it. And that wonderfully illustrates the thing. Actually, I'll start with another one that I recited yesterday. It's a hadith of the Holy Prophet rather than this incident. I'll come to this incident later. That Hazrat Abu Huraira, I think it's in perhaps in Muslim, I can't remember now. But Hazrat Abu Huraira related that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that a man will be presented to God to account for his deeds. And God will say, why is it that I was sick and you didn't come to ask after me? And the man says, Lord, do you get sick? You're the Lord of the worlds. You control everything. You control sickness and health and whatever. How come you got sick? And Allah will say, one of my servants was sick. And you didn't ask after him. And then Allah will say, you're the same person or another person. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. And the person will say, but Lord, how can you be hungry? How can you be in need of food? And God will say, one of my servants was hungry and you did not feed him. And so, the point I'm making is, this is what we will be judged on. So to think that a hungry person comes to us and we kick him in the face, shut the door, go away. Why don't you go and get a job? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? We hear this frequently. And then think that by going to Hajj, all of these misdemeanors are going to be forgiven, is living in cloud cuckoo land. Because God describes the upper hill road to reach to him as looking after the rest of humanity, feeding the needy, looking after the orphans, freeing off the slaves. That's the hard part, God says. And you try and avoid traveling. And this is true. And that's the point I'm making. That when Quran says make preparation for Hajj, it says throughout your life prepare for Hajj. People say, okay. They get their job and they say, okay, £10 a month or 100 rupees a month, I will open a separate account and I will put that money in there. What for? I'm preparing for Hajj. Fine. God has said, prepare for Hajj, and I'm doing it. By the way, I just want to mention Hajj is a duty only once in a lifetime, not every year or every. You don't have to perform 10 Hajjs or 5 Hajjs or whatever, just one is enough. But anyway, to get back to the main idea I was expressing, yes, that is okay, that is fine. You are preparing for Hajj. You're getting together money. And people had to do that in the days of old. That, keep setting aside money and saving and saving and saving until they could go to Hajj. But what people forget is this, that it also means preparing yourself morally and spiritually to present yourself to Allah. Because what you will be doing will be accounting for your deeds in addition to other things. So the question is, do we do that? And if our attitude is, oh, let me rob this person, let me underpay that person, and that's okay. I'm going to go to Hajj and all my sins will be forgiven. Do you think the hurt this man's heart felt when you shut the door in his face and he was begging for food will be forgiven by Allah? No. Go back to the hadith. God will say, I was hungry. Not John or Peter or Zad or Bakr or A or B or X was hungry. I was hungry. Why didn't you feed me? So helping the needy, feeding the poor is akin to helping God. If you don't help anyone else, why should God help you? Why should God help? You ask God for things. Yeah. Grant me this, grant me that, whatever. Why should He grant you those things? Because when someone asks you for help, you shut the door in their face. Go and get a job. Go and ask someone else. Go and do this. Go and do that. Why is it up to me? And then you go to hell. These are the good people who do that. These are the good people. It's not unknown for them to snatch food away from a person's mouth. Because they're going to go to Hajj and everything is going to be forgiven. Now let me get back to this incident. It is related, I think, in Tazkaratul Awliya, which is a compilation of life histories of awliya in Islam. I suppose the closest word to it is saints, but doesn't actually fully express the idea of awliya. Awliya actually means friends of Allah. And I am repeating this, so I do apologize to those of you who heard the Friday sermon yesterday. But it makes a very valid point in the context of Hajj, and we are coming up to Hajj and Eid al-Adha. So I thought this is a good topic. This Waliullah was returning from Hajj. And he was an old man. And He thought because of his frail health and so on, it'll be difficult, if not impossible, for him to attempt the Hajj again. So, on his way back, he kept on praying to Allah to tell him whether his Hajj was Hajj Mabrur, a Hajj that was acceptable in the sight of God. And he kept on praying and he kept on praying, and eventually God answered. God said, no, his Hajj wasn't Hajj Mabrur. It wasn't accepted. And he was shocked. And he fell and he cried. And he asked God, is there anyone whose Hajj was accepted? And God told him, yes, there's one person whose Hajj has been accepted this year. Out of all the multitude, maybe 500,000 people, only one person's Hajj has been accepted by Allah. So this Sufi, this Wali, he pleaded with Allah. He pleaded with Allah to tell him who this person is. And God told him who this person was, where he was. And in those days, as you know, there were no embassies and there were no immigration departments and there was nothing, and you didn't have to make an application for visa and you didn't have to show sufficient funds to maintain yourself and so on. So this Wali just turned his face and rather than go home, went to the man's house. And he knocked on the door and the man opened the door and this Wali grabbed him and embraced him and started crying and so on. And the man was astonished and he said, I don't know you. Who are you? And why are you embracing me and kissing my hands and so on and so forth? And this Waliullah said, I want to congratulate you. And he told him the whole story. And he told him that he is the only one whose Hajj has been accepted. And the man was puzzled. And he said, God told you my Hajj has been accepted. And Waliullah said, yes. The man said, but I didn't go to Hajj. I didn't go to Hajj. So how could my Hajj be accepted? And the Wali was astonished by this and he said, I don't know. But I prayed to God and God said the only person whose Hajj was accepted this year is you. The man said, well, I set off for Hajj. This is true. I set off for Hajj. I intended to. But what happened was, I got to the end of the street and I heard these children. They were crying and crying and crying. And I knocked on the door and this lady opened the door and I said to her, you know, what kind of mother are you? Your children are crying and you're not doing anything about it. And the whole street can hear and their screams and cries are so terrible that it brought tears to my eyes. And the lady said, I know they're crying, but my husband died a few months ago. I've run out of money. They're hungry. I put a pan on the fire with some leaves and stones and things in it, and every now and then I go and stir it to pretend there is some food in it. And I'm hoping that they'll cry and eventually get tired and go to sleep. Because I have no food to give them. What can I explain to them? What can I tell them? And the man said, this brought tears to my eyes. And I went back home, put all my stuff away, and took all the money that I had saved up throughout my life for Hajj, and I went and I gave it to this lady so that she could feed her kids. Now I have no money to go to Hajj. Maybe I'll never have money to fulfill my dream of presenting myself before my Maker. But I couldn't bear, my heart couldn't bear the cries of those children. Maybe Allah will forgive me for not going to Hajj. And that was the only man whose Hajj was Hajj Mabrur, whose Hajj was acceptable in the sight of God. That is the point about Hajj. Think about that hadith again. God will ask you, I was sick and you didn't come asking if I needed any help. I was hungry and you didn't ask whether I needed any food. I was thirsty and you didn't offer me a cup of water. This is God saying that to serve humanity is equal to serving God. To fulfill the needs of humanity is equal to fulfilling the needs of Allah. It is only then that your Hajj becomes acceptable. Not simply the best amongst us are those who actually don't defraud others, who simply shut the door in the hungry man's face rather than rob him of all that he has. These are the best amongst us. And then we go for Hajj. And then we go for a second Hajj. And then we go for a third Hajj. So that we can write the title Haji in front of our name. And there are people dying of hunger. And there are people dying of sickness. And there are people who need education. But it's more important that we perform 8 Hajj, or 5 Hajj, or 3 Hajj. We have lost sight of the spirit of Hajj. That was the point I was trying to make. And we've come up with this idea that we can commit fraud and do all manner of sins and lie and cheat and disgrace humanity and do disservice to humanity. And then we'll go and perform a Hajj and everything will be hunky-dory. All our sins will be forgiven. We'll arrive at the doors of heavens and we'll be let in and we'll have 72 hurs and palaces and so on. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It doesn't work that way. This is not what happens. And I just wanted to, in this first broadcast about Hajj, as I said, there'll probably be 4 or 5. But in this first broadcast about Hajj, I wanted to bury this idea as deep as possible that you can intentionally commit sins throughout your life in the hope that when you go for Hajj and come back with a big title, capital H, capital A, capital J, capital I, Haji, we would have become purer, holier, forgiven. No, it wouldn't. This is all for today. I just want to make some announcements. We are taking a break from Monday. This is next Monday coming. And so there'll be no reflections of the Holy Quran broadcast on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. These are broadcast 7 p.m. UK time, or 1900 hours in military terms. So we won't have those. On Friday is Eid, inshallah. So we will have an Eid service that will be broadcast with the khutbah and namaz and so on. And then, of course, we will have a brief Friday service, it being a Friday. And then we will not have a Lessons in Islam next Saturday. And also, although tomorrow we'll have the Call of the Messiah, but next Sunday we will not have Call of the Messiah. And our broadcasts, normal broadcasts, will restart on the 3rd of August. So just to remind you that tomorrow we'll have Call of the Messiah at the normal time. And then our next broadcast will be on Friday, 31st of July at 11 a.m., which will be our Eid service. With the prayer that Allah keeps the whole humanity under His protection, and keeps them safe and sound and free from harm. I take my leave of you. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.